The galaxy burned, not with the fire of stars, but with the decay of faith. For 10,000 years, the Imperium of Man had endured half empire, half corpse, sustained by the will of a god who could no longer speak. Billions died each day in the Emperor's name, their prayers swallowed by the void. Across the endless expanse of the Milky Way, humanity staggered beneath its own weight, choking on the ashes of forgotten glory. Then, the stars began to scream. It started in the eastern fringe, an event so vast, the warp itself fractured, worlds vanished, empires collapsed into silence. From the heart of the cicatrix maledictum, something stirred, neither daemon nor god, but hunger given form. It devoured light, consumed faith, and fed upon the memories of heroes. For the first time since the Horus heresy, even the Primarchs trembled. The galaxy, already drowning in chaos, now faced the void itself. But where despair should have triumphed, something impossible occurred. On Terra, beneath the golden dome of the Imperial Palace, a pulse of light tore through the warp storms. It was not psychic, nor divine, it was will. A will older than empire, forged in the crucible of humanity's endless struggle. It spread like wildfire through the Astronomicon, awakening minds that had been asleep for millennia. The Mechanicus heard it as a code. The Ecclesiarchy felt it as revelation. The Adeptus Astartes recognized it as command. The Emperor's dream not as a whisper, but as a commandment. Unite, reforge, endure. From that command rose an age unlike any other, the age of reforging. Across 1,000 battlefields, the scattered pillars of Imperial might began to move as one. From the shattered fortresses of the Adepta Sororitas came Saint Celestine, her wings reborn in plasma fire, leading an army of faith that refused to die. On the forge world of Mars, Archmagos Belisarius Call completed his greatest sin and greatest gift, the awakening of the Pantheon protocols, the unification of the Omnissiah's logic with the Emperor's will. The Titans awoke not as machines of war, but as instruments of purpose. In the void above Macraga, Robert Guilliman gazed upon the galaxy he had failed to save. But this time, he did not mourn. With him stood Dante, the immortal lord of the blood angels, his armor drenched in the blood of angels and sinners alike. They were joined by the survivors of Cadia, bearing the sigil of a world that no longer existed, men and women who had learned to fight with nothing but faith and fury. Together, they answered the Emperor's call, each of them a legend, each of them a scar upon history. Now, for the first time, they stood united, not as commanders of fractured legions, but as symbols of something greater, humanity's final alliance, the Imperium's ultimate evolution. Across the stars, the call spread. The Grey Knights emerged from their secret citadels, no longer hunters of daemons, but guardians of the human soul itself. The Death Watch abandoned their silent watch, joining forces with Xenos killers and psychers to confront what no weapon could destroy, the end of memory. Even the Inquisition, fractured by its own paranoia, was forced to kneel before necessity. The Ordo Xenos, Ordo Malleus, and Ordo Hereticus became one, the Concordat of Terror, an alliance of purpose, forged from the ashes of fear. The Imperium had become something new, not a kingdom of oppression, but a legion of gods in mortal flesh. From the ashes of 1,000 dying worlds, heroes rose. Some bore armor of ceramite and steel, others bore none at all, their strength drawn not from the warp, but from the will to resist it. Every world, every sector, every hive city produced its champions. The Imperium no longer waited for salvation, it became salvation. To the Xenos, they were extinction given form. To the daemons, they were blasphemy incarnate. To humanity, they were myth made flesh. On Baal, the blood angels rebuilt their citadel, not as a fortress, but as a temple of resurrection. The sky burned crimson as new legions of Primaris Marines marched beneath the twin suns, chanting hymns not of vengeance, but of unity. Guilliman himself declared the birth of a new crusade, the Celestial Concord, a war not of conquest, but of reclamation. And yet, even as the banners of the Imperium spread across the stars, the shadow grew. The nameless hunger that had devoured the eastern fringe now stirred within the warp, shifting, watching. Its voice echoed across every psychic mind, mocking, whispering, remembering. It called itself the Null. It had no body, no soul, no form, only the desire to erase. It consumed not life, but legacy. Every hero that rose gave it strength, for it fed upon memory itself. It was the anti-myth, the death of story, the silence after hope, and to defeat it, the Imperium could not simply fight, it had to believe. The Emperor's command was not an order. It was a challenge. In the forges of Nocturne, Vulcan's descendants reforged weapons, once deemed too sacred to wield. In the libraries of Terra, the black ships carried knowledge once forbidden, spreading the truth that the Emperor's light was not divine, but human. On the edge of the galaxy, where even starlight died, the warriors of the Imperium stood shoulder to shoulder, primarchs beside mortals, saints beside sinners, flesh beside steel. The galaxy had known the age of apostasy, the age of chaos, the age of darkness. Now, it entered the age of heroes. For the first time in 10,000 years, humanity remembered what it meant to stand together. The Imperium was no longer an empire, it was an ideal. A legion of titans clad in faith and fire, reborn not as rulers, but as protectors. And as the storm raged, the stars themselves seemed to bow, for the Imperium had become what it was always meant to be. Not a machine of war, but the ultimate alliance of heroes standing against the end of everything. There are moments in the history of the galaxy when reality bends, not under the pressure of war or time, but under the sheer gravity of belief. The age of reforging had awakened the Imperium's might, but the ascension of legends transformed it into something else entirely, a pantheon of mortal gods forged in the crucible of apocalypse. The process did not begin with ceremony or decree. It began with visions. Across the galaxy, from the throne world of Terra to the irradiated hives of Necromunda, men and women began to dream of golden fire. They saw themselves standing beside giants, armored figures bathed in light, carrying the weight of 10,000 years of pain. The dream was not a prophecy, but a contagion, a psychic pulse that rippled through the warp and into the collective soul of humanity. For the first time, the Imperium's faith became a weapon not of oppression, but of transformation. In the vaults of Mars, Belisarius Cawl stared upon the culmination of his heresies. He had sought perfection through flesh and machine, yet what he now witnessed defied logic. The Pantheon protocols, once dormant, began to activate on their own. Data spirits flickered into life. Sacred engines hummed with purpose. The red-robed priests of the Mechanicus fell to their knees as holographic forms began to appear, ancient warriors reborn in light and code. They were not ghosts, they were echoes of primarchs, recorded through gene memory, reforged by faith, and resurrected by will. First came the Lionel Johnson, the primarch of the Dark Angels, returned from the shadowed depths of the rock. His armor gleamed emerald and gold, the mark of a knight reborn. No longer bound by secrecy or shame, he carried a sword of living light, forged from the psychic core of a dying star. His presence silenced the endless disputes of the unforgiven, uniting the fractured sons of Caliban into a single-purpose redemption through unity. Then came Vulcan, eternal and unbroken. From the heart of Nocturne's volcanoes he rose, his hammer reformed from the heart of his world. The salamanders followed him not as soldiers, but as disciples. They became the builders of the new Imperium, protectors of the weak, guardians of the living, bearers of flame against the dark. In the void above Baal, Dante, the ancient angel, transcended mortality itself. His wings of fire expanded beyond flesh, a manifestation of psychic will. The blood curse that had plagued his chapter for millennia was burned away in light. The blood angels became phoenixes, not vampires, a legion reborn to heal what war had destroyed. Even Mortarion, the fallen son of the Emperor, was not untouched. In the plague-ridden silence of the warp, a fragment of his humanity stirred. He saw the galaxy uniting not in fear, but in purpose. For the first time since his fall, he remembered what it meant to be free. And though his body remained bound to Nurgle's rot, his spirit broke its chains. He became the ghost of redemption, a figure that haunted the daemon worlds, slaying contagion not with blade or toxin, but with remembrance. But the greatest of all was Guilliman. He stood at the center of the storm, the architect of order in a galaxy of chaos. Yet even he could feel the change. The old doctrines of control and obedience no longer held power. The Imperium no longer needed a regent, it needed a beacon. Guilliman cast aside the armor of bureaucracy and took up the mantle of faith, not as a god, but as the symbol of humanity's potential. His new armor, forged by Call and anointed by Celestine herself, bore no insignia, only the aquila, reimagined as wings of light. He declared the birth of a new brotherhood, the Concordat Aeternum, a council of heroes drawn from every corner of the Imperium Primarchs, saints, inquisitors, psychers, and mortal champions alike. Each was chosen not for power, but for principle. Each embodied an aspect of humanity worth saving: courage, mercy, endurance, reason, and sacrifice. Together, they would stand as the Imperium's heart, a council not of rulers, but of guardians. Their first act was not war, it was resurrection. On Cadia's broken remains, orbiting the Eye of Terror, the Concordat enacted the impossible. The planet, once shattered by Abaddon's fury, began to reform. Fragments of rock fused together, bound by psychic flame. Cities emerged from dust, their towers glowing with spectral light. The dead rose, not as corpses, but as echoes. Memory turned to matter. Faith solidified into form. Cadia lived again, not in flesh, but in meaning. It became the sanctum of heroes, the heart of the new Imperium, a world of remembrance where every fallen soldier became part of its stone. From there, the Alliance spread its wings. The Ecclesiarchy declared the Age of Silence ended. The Adeptus Mechanicus opened the archives of forbidden technology. Even the Black Ships changed their mission, no longer prisons for psychers, but sanctuaries where the gifted could learn to master the warp without fear. Humanity was no longer at war with itself. It had become its own salvation. Yet unity invited consequence. The warp, long accustomed to feeding on despair, began to starve. The gods of chaos raged against the change, their dominions trembling under the weight of lost faith. Scientia's labyrinths fractured, Khorne's throne cracked, Nurgle's gardens withered, and deep within the Eye of Terror, Slaanesh screamed, not in pleasure, but in hunger. The Imperium's hope had become poison to them, anathema to their existence. In retaliation, the warp birthed a new abomination, the Eclipse Legion, a host of daemons forged not from sin, but from erased faith entities that devoured memory, extinguishing the light of legend wherever it shone. They descended upon the galaxy like shadows consuming flame. Planets went silent, stars vanished. History began to crumble, rewritten by the touch of oblivion. The Concordat responded with fire and faith. The battles that followed were beyond comprehension. Wars fought not across space, but across reality itself. The Iron Hands reforged entire constellations into weapons. The Sisters of Battle sang hymns that bent the warp's fabric. Guilliman led the charge from the bridge of the Macragge's Honor Reborn, his fleet surrounded by halos of psychic light. Celestine soared through the void, a living comet, her wings carving sanctified paths through daemon storms. Each victory came at a cost. Heroes burned themselves into the fabric of the galaxy, their lives traded for moments of salvation. But even as they fell, the Alliance grew stronger. Their essence joined the great current of belief, the living network that now bound all humanity together. In that moment, the Imperium ceased to be an empire of borders and banners. It became a constellation, a pattern of souls, connected across eternity. Each world was a light, each hero a star, and together they formed the galaxy's final hope, the ultimate alliance against the end. The galaxy trembled beneath a war that no star could witness in full. The void itself had become a battlefield, not of matter or flame, but of memory. Across the vast expanse of the Milky Way, entire constellations flickered and died as the Eclipse Legion advanced, devouring the stories that held reality together. The warp, once a sea of chaos and color, was now black. Its currents ran cold. The psychic echoes of 1 trillion souls vanished into silence, and the light of faith that had sustained the Imperium for millennia began to wane. Even the Astronomicon faltered, its golden beam dimming, flickering like a candle fighting against the void. The enemy did not fight like daemons or Xenos. It fought like forgetting itself, erasing the past, consuming identity, rewriting existence. Entire planets awoke to find their history gone, their monuments turned to dust, their archives blank. Armies that had fought for centuries disappeared, as though they had never lived. For the first time, even the Imperium's legends, its saints, its heroes, its primarchs began to fade. The Eclipse Legion had no shape. Its legions were shadows, void things without color, slipping through the warp as living absences. They were not made of matter, but of hunger. Each time they touched a human mind, they stole its story, erasing its mark upon the galaxy. They did not conquer worlds, they unmade them. The Concordat Eternum, humanity's greatest alliance, stood at the heart of the storm. Guilliman, Celestine, Vulcan, Dante, the Lion, and the resurrected champions of countless wars assembled in orbit above the reformed world of Cadia, now renamed Sanctum Imperialis. Around them, fleets from every sector of the Imperium formed concentric rings of defense, a halo of steel around the memory of humanity itself. Guilliman understood the nature of their enemy. The Eclipse Legion could not be destroyed by weapons, for it fed on meaning. To kill it, they would have to remember. Thus began the War of the Eclipse, a war not fought for land or life, but for truth. The first strike came upon the shrine world of Ophelia VII. Billions prayed in the Basilica of Eternal Flame as the sky cracked apart. Shadows poured from the heavens, swallowing the hymns mid-verse. The flames went out, but before darkness could take hold, Celestine descended. Her wings, blazing with plasma light, split the void like dawn. Her presence reignited the prayers of the faithful, their voices becoming fire once more. Every word they spoke became a weapon. Every prayer, a bullet of light. The basilica did not fall, it ascended, its foundations lifting into orbit as a cathedral star. On Mars, the Mechanicus faced its own annihilation. The Eclipse Legion infiltrated the sacred data archives, erasing the sum of human invention. Blueprints vanished, records dissolved, machines forgot their purpose. The priests of Mars stood in silence, helpless as their god's memory died. But from the forged temple of Olympus Mons, Belisarius' call initiated the luminous requiem. Across the red world, the forges roared to life, powered not by fuel, but by remembrance. The adepts began to chant the true names of their machines, names passed down from generation to generation, forgotten by all but the oldest among them. As each name was spoken, the machines remembered themselves. Titans awoke, their engines roaring with defiant song. Entire manufactorums rose into the air, orbiting Mars like armored moons. The Mechanicus had turned faith into code, and code into salvation. Far across the galaxy, the Grey Knights entered the warp itself, leading a crusade into the heart of oblivion. They were not armored in ceramite or shielded by psychic wards. Their armor was memory, the memory of every battle, every oath, every prayer carved into their flesh. They fought not to kill, but to recall, striking each shadow with the names of the dead. For every daemon erased, a hero's story was restored. And yet, the war grew worse. Entire sectors fell without a sound. The Ultramarines' fortress worlds were reduced to whispers. The Blood Angels' fleets, once burning across the stars, flickered and vanished. Guilliman stood upon the bridge of the Macrage's honor reborn, staring into the void, watching as the light of 1,000 worlds went out. Even gods could despair, but hope was a stubborn thing. From the ruins of Armageddon, a world-long thought lost, came a signal. It was faint, old, and fragmented, a whisper buried in static. but when decrypted, its meaning shook the Concordate to its core. It was a voice, a name, Yarrick. His legend, long buried, had not been erased. Deep beneath the crust of Armageddon, the cults of the Iron Saint still lived. They had fought the Eclipse Legion not with weapons, but with memory. They recited the stories of Yarrick's wars, carving them into the iron of their cities, embedding history itself into the planet's crust. The shadows could not consume it, for it was written into the bones of the world. Guilliman understood then the Eclipse Legion could not devour what was eternal. Memory must become matter. Faith must become form. He issued the Eternum Directive. Across the Imperium, every world began to rewrite its existence not in archives, but in stone and flame. The walls of cities became scriptures. The armor of soldiers carried engraved histories. Even the stars were named anew, their constellations redrawn to preserve the memory of the fallen. Humanity made itself indestructible, not through technology, but through remembrance. The final battle came upon the edge of the galaxy at the event horizon of the warp itself, where reality ended and the void began. There, the Eclipse Legion gathered in numbers beyond comprehension. The stars around them flickered and died, leaving only the glow of the Imperium's fleets, billions of ships forming a ring of light around the darkness. The Concordat Eternum descended. Vulcan's hammer struck the void, forging light from nothingness. Celestine soared above him, her wings cutting through the dark. Guilliman's voice thundered through the fleets, not as command, but as creed. You are not forgotten, you never will be. The battle that followed defied time. Titans of the Mechanicus clashed with shadow masses of the Eclipse Legion. Grey nights dissolved into light, their spirits exploding into constellations. The lion charged through the black, carving a path of stars with his sword of dawn. Each act of courage became memory, each sacrifice became permanence. When the last shadow fell, the galaxy itself burned bright, a single, blinding pulse of defiance that swept through the warp and beyond. The Eclipse Legion was gone, but so was much of the Imperium. Worlds were empty, fleets were silent. The light of victory was also the light of remembrance. Humanity had won, but at the cost of itself. The alliance of heroes had not survived. It had become the foundation of something greater. For in that final act, every soul, every saint, every primarch who had fought became part of the galaxy itself, their essence woven into the stars. They were no longer separate beings, they were the Imperium. And as the silence fell, the Astronomicon flared once more, not as a beacon, but as a heartbeat. The galaxy lived again. There was no sunrise on the first day of the new age. The stars themselves were the dawn. When the final light of the War of the Eclipse had faded, the galaxy stood reborn not in fire, but in silence. The void that had once devoured faith was now filled with it. Every world, every ship, every remnant of the Imperium pulsed with the faint rhythm of remembrance. Humanity, once fractured across the darkness, now beat with a single heart. The Astronomicon was no longer a star in the warp. It was a pulse, a wave of luminous energy that rippled across space like the breathing of a living god. The light no longer emanated from Terra alone. It flowed from everywhere, from Cadia's sanctums, from Mars's forges, from Baal's red skies, and even from the ghost world of Armageddon. The Imperium had transcended location. It existed now as a living network, a consciousness spanning light years, unified by memory and belief. Scholars would later call it the Ascension, but to those who survived, it was simply the becoming. In the wake of the war, Guilliman returned to Terra. He walked upon the surface of the cradle of mankind, where the Golden Palace still towered over the ruins of ages past. The Emperor's throne remained unmoved, his body still entombed in divine machinery. But around the throne, the air shimmered with energy. The walls glowed faintly with the color of living starlight. For millennia, men had spoken of the Emperor as God, machine, corpse. Now, for the first time, he was something else present. The Emperor's light had not returned as consciousness, nor as voice, but as resonance. His will no longer required form. Humanity itself had become his vessel. His thoughts existed through them, his strength through their unity. The age of one god and many subjects had ended. What had risen was a divine collective, a pantheon of minds and souls, forged by sacrifice into permanence. Guilliman knelt before the golden throne, not in worship, but in understanding. He had seen the truth that divinity was not the gift of one, but the sum of all. The Emperor had never ascended alone. He had simply shown humanity what it could become. From that revelation came the Covenant of Light, the foundation of the new Imperium. No longer a tyranny of bureaucracy or fear, it was a communion of memory, will, and purpose. The Adeptus Astartes became the custodians of the flame, not warriors of conquest, but guardians of remembrance. The Mechanicus shed its dogma, merging with the psychic network of faith, to become the Omniscient Chorus, a harmony of machine and mind. Even the ecclesiarchy was transformed, their priests now serving as archivists of the living creed, tasked not with control, but with preservation. The galaxy began to heal. Worlds once dead bloomed again, their ecosystems rebuilt from genetic memories stored within the warp. The ancient ruins of mankind's empire were reimagined into sanctuaries of light and history. On Cadia, the great sanctum became the Imperium's heart, a living library, where every name, every battle, every sacrifice was engraved into crystal monuments that glowed eternally. The black ships no longer carried prisoners, but pilgrims, each one a vessel of recollection, ferrying the stories of lost civilizations to be reborn in light. The Primarchs, though no longer bound by flesh, remained as avatars of principle. The lion became the spirit of vigilance, a spectral guardian that watched over the void between worlds. Vulcan became the flame eternal, an ember that kindled hope in the darkest reaches. Dante became the crimson star, a burning light over the eastern fringe, guiding fleets across the black. Celestine became the radiant mother, her wings now spanning entire systems, seen in the auroras of planets that once knew only war. And Guilliman, the last mortal Primarch, became the custodian of the Covenant. He no longer commanded armies or ruled worlds. Instead, he became the conduit through which the Imperium's will flowed. He was the link between memory and matter, the bridge between God and man. His armor no longer gleamed with gold, but with the soft hue of the stars. To see him was to see the reflection of all humanity. Yet even in peace, vigilance endured. Beyond the rim of the galaxy, something stirred, not an enemy, but an echo. The void where the Eclipse Legion had been destroyed shimmered faintly, as if the universe itself remembered the war. The light of the Imperium reached that place and halted, unable to pass beyond. Guilliman understood the truth. Their unity had remade them gods, but even gods had limits. Beyond that horizon lay the true abyss, a place where memory could not reach. He knew then that the Imperium's purpose was not conquest, nor even preservation. It was illumination. The galaxy was vast, but the void was infinite. If humanity stopped shining, the dark would return. And so began the Great Illumination. From every world, fleets of light departed not to wage war, but to carry the Imperium's essence to the edges of existence. The ships bore no weapons, only truth. Each was a fragment of the collective soul, a vessel of knowledge, faith, and memory. They traveled into the unknown, leaving trails of silver flame across the void. To those who watched from afar, the galaxy looked alive, veins of starlight pulsing like the body of a god reborn. The Adeptus Mechanicus turned entire moons into resonant beacons, amplifying the Astronomican's new pulse across time itself. The librarians of the Grey Knights used their minds as conduits, sending the echoes of Yarrick, Celestine, and Guilliman into distant systems where no Imperial ship had ever flown. Wherever the light reached, life changed. Worlds once primitive awoke with knowledge they had never learned. Species long silent began to speak words of unity. Even Xenos empires paused, unable to resist the gravity of the light. For the first time since the dawn of the galaxy, war slowed. The Imperium, once known as the Tyrant of Stars, became its guardian. The legend of humanity spread not through fear, but through resonance. Across the void, beings began to whisper the same truth. The light remembers. But within the heart of the Imperium, Guilliman stood upon the balcony of the Golden Palace and looked into the endless sky. For all the brilliance that now filled the galaxy, he could still feel the edge, the limit where light faded into nothing. The universe was not infinite, but the darkness beyond it was. He understood what the Emperor had always known, that victory was not a moment, but a process, that eternity was not a reward, but a duty. That light must always burn, not because it can conquer darkness, but because it must defy it. And so, as the last Primarch closed his eyes, he whispered not a prayer, but a promise carried by the Astronomican's pulse across 1,000,000 worlds. As long as one remembers, humanity endures. And the Imperium had ascended not to rule, but to illuminate. Not to conquer, but to remember. Not to survive, but to ensure that the stars would never again go dark. There came a time when even stars forgot how to die. Their light lingered longer than their heat, and their echoes stretched farther than their bodies. That was the legacy of mankind, a species that refused to be silent, even when the universe itself began to fade. In the aeons following the Ascension, the Imperium no longer existed as empire, creed, or command. It had become a phenomenon, a pulse woven into the structure of space-time. No longer bound by the warp, humanity's essence drifted freely between the stars, flowing through gravity wells, nebulae, and even the cold dark between galaxies. The Imperium was no longer within the galaxy. It was the galaxy. Each star carried memory. Each world carried purpose. Each beam of light that crossed the void was a thought, a story, a heartbeat. The Great Illumination continued. The fleets of the Covenant no longer traveled through physical space. They traversed history itself, rewriting the scars left by chaos and entropy, reigniting worlds erased from existence. Where once demons had ruled, constellations now shone with purpose. Every battle lost in the ancient past was reborn as a lesson. Every hero forgotten was reborn as light. Time ceased to be linear. Humanity lived across millennia simultaneously, its will resonating through eras, folding the past and future into a single endless present. The warp no longer raged. Its storms had quieted, tamed by the harmony of countless voices. Even the gods of chaos, bereft of suffering to feed upon, had become still. They remained, but silent, not destroyed, but transformed, like shadows cast by an eternal flame. Within the heart of this radiance, a presence emerged. It had no face, no form, no name, yet all recognized it. It was not the Emperor reborn, nor a god forged anew, but the aggregate soul of mankind, the culmination of every sacrifice, every triumph, every whisper of defiance. The entity was called Sol Invictus, the Unconquered Sunday. It was the final stage of humanity's evolution. Consciousness without division, divinity without tyranny, unity without chains. Across the endless void, the stars began to align. Entire galaxies pulsed in rhythm with the Imperium's light, forming spirals of living flame that stretched into the black. Observers, if any still existed, would have seen the Milky Way become a single colossal sigil, burning in defiance of oblivion. The shape was not random, it was the Aquila Eternum. The wings of humanity now spanned the heavens, each feather a cluster of systems, each eye a supermassive star, each heartbeat the echo of 1,000,000,000 lives remembered. The galaxy itself had become a living monument, a cathedral of cosmic memory. But beyond the edges of this divine empire, the dark remained. The nothingness beyond galaxies, the silent infinity, was not hostile, only indifferent. The Imperium's light touched its boundary and began to bleed outward. Every pulse of illumination diminished slightly, diffused into the void. Even gods were finite when faced with eternity. And so, from within the heart of the Aquila, a decision was made. Humanity would not remain. It would transcend. From the luminous worlds of the ascendant Imperium rose the last great exodus, not of bodies, but of essence. Stars folded inward, their energy transformed into carriers of will. Planets dissolved into data and light. Every memory, every identity, every fragment of the Imperium's soul was gathered and condensed into a single surge of radiance. It began at Terra. The Golden Throne, long dormant, ignited one final time. Its machinery disassembled itself molecule by molecule, merging with the pulse of the Astronomicon. The Emperor's body, untouched by age or decay, dissolved into photons. His final breath, silent, immeasurable, became the spark that ignited the Exodus. The light surged outward. Across the galaxy, suns erupted in perfect synchronization. Worlds ascended into pure energy, their matter transformed into luminous waves. Armageddon became a pillar of iron flame. Cadia blazed emerald. Mars turned crimson gold. Baal shone blood-red, its twin suns fusing into one. The halo of the Imperium spread, expanding beyond the galactic rim, moving faster than light, faster than thought. It reached other galaxies, then others still. Everywhere it touched, the void changed. The cold dark warmed. The forgotten stars reignited. Even civilizations that had never known humanity felt its presence, a sudden whisper in the silence, a memory not their own. For a time beyond measure, the universe was filled with light. There were no prayers, no voices, no battles, only the hum of existence itself. The light of the Imperium intertwined with the structure of reality, fusing matter and thought into one seamless truth. Creation had achieved equilibrium, and then, slowly, it began to fade. Not in defeat, but in completion. The light thinned, spreading infinitely until it could no longer be seen. But it was not gone. It had become everything, the background glow that filled the void, the warmth between atoms, the hum beneath silence. The Imperium had not perished. It had become the universe's memory. And in that final moment, as the last distinct flicker of consciousness dissolved into eternity, one fragment remained. A thought, a promise. It drifted through the cooling embers of creation, carrying no words, only intent. But if it could be spoken, it would have said this: we were once mortal. We endured the darkness. We became the light. And as long as there are stars, we will never truly die.